Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Baron here. So I'm going to be talking about a game that I am anxiously awaiting and very excited about. It's called Armored Warfare. If you haven't heard about it, just watch some of this footage, listen to the discussion, and there's a beta sign up in the video description below. So beta's going to be coming out at some point, late this year, early 2015. So I highly encourage you to check it out because it is going to be one of those free-to-play tank games similar to World of Tanks and War Thunder Tanks. Now, when you think about it, it's going to be modern tanks, so it's kind of going to be a new take on the genre of armored warfare. Right now I think the two main competitors are World of Tanks and War Thunder Tanks. And you may be thinking, as I did, well, in World of Tanks and War Thunder Tanks, there's a couple different types. World War II based vehicles. There's a couple different types of tank classes which you will not see in modern tank warfare anymore. You would have light tanks, medium tanks, heavy tanks, tank destroyers, and self-propelled artillery. Now, in a modern sense, light tanks have kind of now gone in the role of infantry transport and armored fighting vehicles, and armored warfare is going to use them kind of as a recon role. And then medium tanks and heavy tanks kind of hybridized into what is now commonly referred to as main battle tanks in modern warfare. And we still have self-propelled artillery. So in armored warfare, you're going to have three main classes, at least that's what they've said so far. You're going to have the main battle tanks, recon tanks, and artillery. Now, if you think about it, though, there will be kind of a resurgence, but in a totally different style of gameplay. And that is that, in World War II, you had tank destroyers, and they were either casemate or open-turreted. There was lots of different designs and models. But in the modern sense, tank destroyers are usually lighter tanks armed with anti-tank missiles. And there are anti-tank missiles at least being played with. At least that's from what the PAX footage shows. So that should be pretty interesting to see the different types of weapons you have available to you in the modern, armored warfare type style. So another thing that I think armored warfare is going to be different than the others, than the World War II based armored fighting vehicle games, is that it's less about the countries, right? There's going to be many different nations all having different fighting vehicles, different armor. But if you think about it, there's plenty of modern nations that have their own vehicles, lesser nations as opposed to your China, United States, United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, or Russia, although there will be Soviet era tanks obviously in the game. But it's going to be more about the types of vehicles. And you may ask yourself, well, what about tech trees? How is this going to work? If I'm not going to go down a Chinese tech tree. I'm not going to go down a Russian tech tree or, a British tech tree. How is this really going to work? Well, how armored warfare is going to do it is they're going to focus instead, you're basically your own private military company. And you're like, well, what kind of vehicles do I open up? There's no definitive tech tree. Okay, I start at the tier 1, Russian main battle tanks and work my way up to the T-80s and T-90s. What's gonna happen with that? Well, basically, from what they're saying so far, is that it's kind of going to be linearly based through a progression based off what you do in the game. That seems to make sense, right? Yeah, but what's the tech tree, right? Well, you're going to establish relationships with other corporations, contractors, and non-government suppliers. You're basically building a private military. So that's why there's less of a focus on nation versus nation as opposed to, these nations had these tanks, but you can basically have any and all tanks available to you. It's not going to be, a typical Russia versus United States, China versus Russia, things like that. You're going to have, I would imagine, Swedish, French, all kinds of just random other little nations. And I don't say little nations, but ones that have produced far less armored fighting vehicles than others, but therefore the variety is going to be greater. And in any one battle, you're going to find, a coalition of nations fighting tanks, fighting for private military companies against other private military companies, which is kind of cool because it's going to give a nice, fresh look on modern tank warfare. And that's going to be further, kind of benefited by the whole player versus environment system, which is something that World of Tanks doesn't have yet, although from what I hear they are working on it, as you may have heard in a video I posted on War Thunder earlier when I was talking about player versus environment and how such a fresh concept I think that is for this type of genre of game. Tank battles. I think players versus environment is going to be very well received if you do it right. So you're going to be able to work with friends and you're going to be playing against artificially intelligent controlled tanks and armor. So I think that's going to be kind of cool. So you can imagine that, the number of scenarios are going to be potentially endless since you're acting as a private military company. You may find yourself all over the world in different types of environments and maps and missions, which, really by making it private military, I think, the possibilities are truly endless as to, what you're going to be able to see and do. And I think that's kind of cool. I like that. And I think the whole private military company further adds to a lot more customization as far as, what tanks you're bringing out, what tanks your friends are bringing out, and kind of upgrades and stuff like that. I'm pretty excited to see how that plays out. And as far as map sizes, I'm going to pull up a map right here, and this is a new map that they've just released, and this is what kind of sparked my interest in making my first video on Armored Warfare, and trust me, there will be more. But here you can see the map Cold Strike. And Cold Strike, you can see how they've kind of specified the different types of zones because the developers who are making these maps are kind of already, taking note of where they kind of want what type of action to go. It's divided into a couple different zones. The white zones, which are the spawn zones, and it's the drop-off points for the teams. In the north, it's a field camp. And in the south, it's a bus station. Then there's the green zone, and that's the most direct route to the enemy base. But, obviously, you're open to fire from the elevated positions, which are in the blue zone, and even from those tanks hiding in the red zone, which is kind of a more urban environment. So even in this one map, you're going to get a little bit of everything. You're going to have your urban combat, where probably the majority of the tanks go, and the majority of the main battle tanks probably go. You may have artillery sniping from the blue zone, and recon tanks running around in the green zone. So it's kind of cool how they're basing their map design around, obviously, core gameplay mechanics, which is what you'd want to do if you're developing maps. So it's kind of cool, but as far as the size of the maps, I watched a developer diary video, and they were talking about how they experimented with 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters map at first, and it seemed kind of small. And now they're at 1,200 meters by 1,200 meters. So one could assume that if that's kind of, the map size they're going with, that Cold Strike might be within that. Now, if you watch the PAX footage, you saw some other maps, like I think it was an oil fields is what they called it. And it was player versus environment, where you'd have to strike at certain things, like the player versus environment, what does that really mean? Well, some of the examples we've seen is okay, you're tasked with fighting enemy vehicles as kind of they're defending certain locations like SAM sites, right? And fuel bunkers and other strategic objectives. So you have to fight through enemy vehicles to get to the strategic objectives, but if you do or do not, finish your strategic objective, it affects what happens, and obviously the return you would get, whether it be experience or currency, which obviously is what would allow you to progress faster or slower depending on how you did in the map. I saw an example where the tanks were unable to destroy enough of the SAM sites, and 3 transport planes flew over, and one of them got shot down as a direct result of what you did in the game. So I think this game has a lot of potential. I'm very, very interested in it. Following it, I've signed up for beta, and I'm interested to see how many of you guys are interested in this game. Now, it is based off the Cry engine, so you're going to see a lot of really, really rich visuals, and the graphics are going to be great. Furthermore, that the Cry engine is going to allow a nice weather system to be in the game, and it's going to be able to be changed. From one of the videos, they were talking about how that, you may start at kind of an overcast day, and by the end of the battle, an individual battle, it may turn into a blistering thunderstorm. So that's kind of cool. And also they've made the promise that they're planning to patch it regularly. And with all the things that I've talked about, it's going to be pretty interesting to see all the different ways that they patch it regularly, because they're going to be able to continually put in new content. New vehicles, new vehicle components, new game modes, and new game maps. The whole private military kind of concept behind it, I think, allows, and players versus environment, those two things combined, I think are really going to allow Armored Warfare to put out new game modes at a pretty regular pace, so you always have something new. And with players versus environments, you're kind of going to need lots of new missions. Now, it's not going to be just players versus environments. There's also going to be players versus players, as you would expect in a tank warfare game. So, all things considered, I'm extremely excited for this game. I hope it lives up to all of its hype. I will keep you all informed. And my question to you all is twofold. First, are you excited for this game? And if so, have you signed up for the beta? The second thing is, which modern day tank are you looking to play the most? For me, as an American, I would have to say the M1 Abrams, but obviously I'll be playing all of them. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I thank y'all for watching. If you're as hyped for this game as I am, make sure to leave a like in the video and give the video some love, and I will see you guys soon.